Welcome to Dear Brothers and Sisters, where you will hear the raw truth. My name is George, and I am your brother, and I love you. This week, we are going to discuss our educational system. Each week that we've had this program, we list the 7 major issues affecting society, and one of the major issues is the dysfunctioning of our school system. Yet we've never had a program dedicated to our school system. We're correcting that today. Today is the beginning of a 3-part series on our school system. However, before we start that, I'm going to remind you that we have here my book, Dear Brothers and Sisters, Gender and Its Responsibility. This is the only book anywhere that deals with gender on the basis of a universal principle, and it is this book that is the basis of this program. We also have flyers. This one here, The Raw Truth by George, tells you the date and time of the program and what it's about, which you might distribute to your friends. This flyer here says, are you a bull or are you a hamburger meat? And on the other side it says, American Women and the Harem Master. It's considered one of the best articles that I've written. Also, I remind you that we have videotapes and audio tapes of our more popular programs. To get information on the book, on the flyers, on the tapes, all you need to do is call in now. We have a voicemail number. It's 874-7900, extension 1329, 874-7900, extension 1329. If you would care to call now, give us your name and address and phone number. We'd be happy to send you information. Because while you're calling, this is for those of you who have watched before, I will review the 7 major issues affecting society. Number 1, we now have 1.5 million men in prison. That's the latest figure. I feel it's significant. When I wrote my book 3 years ago and started this program, there were 1 million men in prison, and that was considered phenomenally high and the highest incarceration rate in the world. We now have 1.5 million men in prison. That is, we've increased our prison population by 50%. I feel it's a tragedy, it's a disaster, and it's time that this nation rises up and does something about it. Number 2, we have at least 1 million of our youth in street gangs now. Those 1 million youth in street gangs are a direct result of the 1.5 million men in prison, because those youth do not have homes or fully functioning homes. And the gang is the masculine principle that did not work in the system oozing out of the system. And those gangs are really recreating the tribal structure that has served humanity since the beginning of time. Number 3, our women are deteriorating physically, mentally, and emotionally. They have an increasing rate of cirrhosis of the liver, an increasing incidence of lung cancer. 3 to 4 million of the single women have chlamydia or human papillomavirus. They are overworked, they are stressed out, they are apprehensive about the safety of their children and their own safety. Number 4, crime is rampant in this nation. And even though we have a recent spate of statistics that say crime is down in every major category, if you examine it, you will find it's because we picked up 500,000 men and threw them into prison, and many youth into youth detention centers. But as soon as the next crop of young people comes along, we will have more crime than ever. And the solution to crime is not sweeping men off the streets and throwing them in jail. Number 5, our academic institutions are in a state of dysfunction. Our high schools have become holding pens where little more is learned than how to use condoms. And our colleges give increasingly high grade point averages to students with lower and lower SAT scores. Our economy is stagnating at best because we have forgotten the source of new. And lastly, morality and ethics have disappeared from the media. Those are the 7 major issues affecting us today, my brothers and sisters, and every one of those issues is gender related. Now, getting to the subject matter of today's program, our educational institutions. Today, I will really focus on the grade schools. Next week, we will discuss what is information and what is knowledge, and where does information come from and where does knowledge come from, and what are the high schools teaching. But for today, we will just discuss the quality of education, and we will get to its root, to its source, the grade schools. Now, it's easy to say, wow, our education is a mess today, or, we have to do something about education. Or even, as I say at the beginning of each of these programs, high schools have become holding pens where little more is learned than how to use condoms. Well, really, what does that say about anything? What is a good education? What is a bad education? What's the yardstick? What do we compare it to? Well, I think back to the various Civil War documentaries, which can be seen every year on some TV station. The next time you watch, brothers and sisters, or if you recollect the last time you watched, they always read the letters of the soldiers that they send home to their mothers and fathers. Now, these letters are beautifully written, grammatically perfect, no vulgarity. And I'm not talking about the letters written by officers, graduates from the military academies. I'm speaking now of letters written by the privates, by the farm boys who before they volunteered or were drafted into the military, they were walking barefoot behind the plow, stepping in cow plop. Maybe they had their education in a one-room school house, or maybe they just got their education at home from mom and dad. They wrote beautiful letters, letters that you could not get today from a grade school graduate or from a high school graduate, and I feel from very, very few college graduates. So that's one standard. How farm boys, how country boys that were not subjected to large formal educational institutions, how well they wrote, how grammatically correct their letters were. Or even the romanticists. Every once in a while you may find in a book review or in a magazine love letters of the past, of a man to a woman to a man. How beautiful they were written. No word processors, no typewriters, no room for erasures, written in pen and ink. You had to get it right the first time, grammatically correct, no vulgarity. I would say that's a standard that we can use in comparing what our children can do today. Another standard, I wouldn't call a standard, but a reference point, I can remember when I applied to go to high school some 50 years ago. I was in the 8th grade, and in New York City, and I went to New York City schools, and at that time, as I believe it is today, those children that attended city schools, if they had, let's say, an above average ability, they could take exams to go to the Bronx High School of Science, to Peter Stuyvesant, or to Brooklyn Tech. And I elected to try to go to Brooklyn Tech. And the exam that I took, I can remember this, the exam I had to take, one of the questions was, if there's a pole and the sun is shining and it's a 15-foot high pole and that pole casts a 5-foot shadow, how big would the shadow be of a 45-foot building down the street? So we had to be able to determine the proportion, that 5 was a third of 15, and then that building down the street would have a shadow of 15 feet, which was a third of 45. There are many other questions having to do with feet and inches and square feet and square yards. I don't remember, but that one sticks in my mind. How many grade school children today do you feel could answer that question that I just gave? How many high school graduates? How many of those who are now in college? As many of you regular visitors know, and those who read my book, I used to own a small manufacturing company in New Jersey for 23 years. And I had all different levels of employees. I had a high school graduate, a girl in Newark, a young woman, and I had her tested, her handwriting tested, and it came back that she had a fine mind and was capable of doing anything she wanted to do. And she told me her grades in high school were A's and B's. When she added up a column of numbers, she had them all aligned on the left with the decimal points floating. Can you imagine such a thing? Then, when she put in the commas for the thousands, instead of starting from the right and working to the left, she started from the left and worked to the right. This is a young woman with a fine mind who got good grades in high school. She had learned how to type in high school, so I had her do some typing of my business letters. They were full of errors. When I corrected the original and she went to the second try, she made more errors. When I corrected that and she went to the third try, she was reverting back to the original errors. She had no concept of present, future, past tense, of singular or plural. This is a person with a fine mind who had good grades in high school. I had a first-year college student who one day I was walking out in the shop and I saw him with a 6-foot rule measuring on the table, and he came up to me and he said, "George," he said, 5 feet is 60 inches, right? I said, "Yeah, that's right." "Oh," he said, "I figured that out." Now, the way he figured it out, he had a 6-foot rule, and he marked on the table 12 inches, put a mark on the table. Then he moved it and marked 12 inches, and then he moved it and marked 12 inches. And after he had 5 marks, then he brought the ruler down and he saw that it went to 60 inches. Now, I admire his, ingenuity, but the fact that he was a first-year college student and couldn't figure 5 times 12 is 60, that's indicating how poorly our students are doing in school. I think I've given enough examples there to show that our children cannot write decent letters today, have very little concept of grammar, and I'm speaking now American-born children. I should mention one other thing. When I went to high school, almost everybody in high school had immigrant parents. If there's one thing that one group of teachers that had difficulty, it was the English teachers in my high school, because none of us heard the King's English spoken at home. And still we were able to write engineering reports and write letters conveying meaning. Of course, that wonderful high school, Brooklyn Tech, had 6,400 students at the time that I went, all boys, all engineers. Today it's an integrated school and one of the pioneers of the distribution of condoms. So you can even see in the good schools the deterioration of performance. In any event, I spoke to some grade school teachers while preparing for this program, and I asked what their number one problem was. Or I indicated why aren't the students learning anything? Why aren't the students learning anything? First of all, I was shocked to find out that there are no standards. Now, I realize grade schools vary from state to state, from city to city. But this teacher told me there are no standards. If a child flunks a course, flunks a subject, they are promoted. There is no setting anybody back. There's no setting anybody back. Now, in my day, setbacks were a normal thing. And skipping a grade was, not uncommon. Now, who sets standards? Men do. Men are standard and performance oriented. But we have 1.5 million of them, young men, the ones who would be fathers, in prison. So, who's setting standards? In the government, in the schools, at home. So, since we have no men, we won't have any standards either. And there's no not graduating a student because they don't want that student's self-esteem damaged. They also are not preparing those students for the real world. At a place of business, before I started my own business, the fellow next to me was really close to his children, and he would play checkers with his little boy frequently. And he always let the little boy win, always. So one Sunday they had company, and the little boy of the company played with his little boy, played checkers, and he beat him. The little boy went into a tantrum, and he threw the checkers up in the air and screamed and stamped his feet. He thought he was always going to win. His father didn't prepare him for the real world. Yes, I know, I said before, fathers make standards. Right? But fatherhood is deteriorating too. And this fellow was, I wouldn't call him strong, all right? He wasn't teaching his son the masculine values. The masculine values are that you win some and you lose some. The masculine values are that you have to keep trying. The masculine values are that there's competition out there in this world, and the prize goes to the swiftest. Men like standards, and men want to excel in the eyes of their fellow man. It transcends money. Men still want to get that Super Bowl ring on their finger, even if they made $2 million that year. They still want to get the trophy for most valuable player, or home run hitter, or triple crown winner. That's why soldiers like to get medals. They want to show that they have excelled in the standards set by men. There are no standards in our public schools today because there's no masculine involvement in it. We have a socialistic school system that thinks it can operate independent of or without the masculine principle. Number two, the teachers told me they have tremendous disciplinary problems. And the effect of these disciplinary problems are that the teacher has a time slot to present a certain subject, and she has to take time out of that time slot for disciplinary problems. Scolding a child, sending him to the principal, sending a note home to his mother. These things come out of the normal teaching routine of teachers. And which children are the ones who have the big disciplinary problems? The ones who have no fathers at home, primarily. The ones who are lacking a masculine influence. Those children are lacking the big gorilla at home that if they get in trouble in school that day, they know they're going to get it. What's a screaming mommy going to do? So again, we have the cause being the absence of the masculine influence at home. A statistical fact is that 3 out of 4 children who get in trouble with the law are living with mommy only. 3 out of 4 children who get in trouble with the law are living with mommy only. I would presume that that ratio should be similar in the schools. That 3 out of 4 children who are disciplinary problems come from homes in which there is no father. And probably the 4th one comes from a home in which the father doesn't care, or where he's a weak-kneed milksop, where he's not fulfilling his manly function. Okay? He's either absent, weak, or incompetent. Competent fathers set standards, and competent fathers have discipline. Now, there is another area of concern, and that happens to be with some of the teachers too. Because the teachers who are now teaching are products of that school system that had no standards. So they got through grade school without standards. They got through high school without standards. Give them a high school certificate. We don't want to affect their self-esteem, right? Then get them into college, right, through various forms of affirmative action, right? So we go through 3 schools, grade schools, high school, college, no performance, and now that no performance graduate comes and teaches our children. And teaches them what? Nothing. They didn't learn anything. So nothing is going to impart nothing to our students. My heart really goes out to those dedicated teachers who know what they're doing, who take a joy in imparting knowledge to their children, and are inhibited by colleagues of incompetence and the school structure of incompetence and parents who don't give a damn how their children are doing in school. My heart goes out to you, you dedicated teachers, men and women, who love your work and want to impart information and develop the capacity to obtain knowledge in children. It's remarkable that you're functioning today. I had mentioned discipline, and to show you how much discipline in the classroom has changed, I'm going to read to you from statistics from a magazine this year. The 7 major disciplinary problems in 1940. Get this now. The 7 major disciplinary problems in 1940. Talking out of turn, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, cutting in line, dress code violations, that's if you didn't wear your blue tie on assembly day, and littering. Those were the 7 major disciplinary problems in our school system in 1940. In 1950, the 7 major issues are drug abuse, alcohol abuse, pregnancy, suicide, rape, robbery, assault. It's like another world, isn't it, in those 50 years? What teacher today wouldn't be overjoyed to have the 7 disciplinary problems of 1940? Would be elated. It would be heaven to him or her. Drug abuse, assault, robbery, rape, suicide? That's what's going on in our schools? That's not education. That's not an educational environment. That's a disruptive environment that gets our children nervous and upset. It gets boys upset. It gets girls upset. They're afraid to go to school. They get nausea in the morning. They break out in sweats. They get nightmares. Because that school, my brothers and sisters, is in a state of chaos. You have heard me say on these programs many times that when you remove the masculine principle in life, structure breaks down, discipline breaks down, and chaos results. Our educational system today is in a state of chaos because of the lack of the masculine influence in school and at home. Tune in next week for part 2. It was nice being with you today. See you next week.